这里说一下，第一个事情是，我们大家现在不管是技术灌顶也好，技术传承也好，大家应该有个难得的心。
Empowerment and receiving the oral transmission and receiving teachings, you should generate a sense of the mind of cherishing the Dharma. Strictly speaking, whenever you're receiving empowerment or the oral transmission or the teachings, if you were to doze off, to fall asleep, then you are not considered as receiving the complete transmission. I know that we have a lot of people sitting over here, but if you were to doze off, it is that you have not received the entire teaching. If you want to receive the teachings, then you have to try your best not to fall asleep, not to interrupt with your oral transmission. If you're very drowsy, you can use various measures to work with your physical body, such as pinching and pointing with a needle-like object. I received some pictures that there are people whom would lay back to the wall and fall asleep. This is really not good. I'm not going to show you that photo over here. But this particular way of receiving the Dharma teaching is not good. There are people, however, I have to say that they are very diligent and really attentive when it comes to receiving the teachings. When I was young, when I was receiving the teachings, I've never interrupted listening to the oral transmissions. There were times that I got a little drowsy, but I try my best not to fall asleep, though I would spend a long period of time in the evening and engage in various studies. I understand that many of you are probably having too much things to have a long time sleeping, but I think you should try your best to pay attention. The second thing I would like to address is that nowadays, using cell phones, using internet, and so on, we have to be very vigilant, and we have to then keep those distractions under control. I call up on you that do not carry your cell phones whenever it's time to take classes, to attend classes, and so on. I noticed that lots of the practitioners still have the habit of taking photos all the time, especially when it comes to the large gathering of sanghas and so on. And when such actions are detected, then your cell phone will be asked to put away, and other measures. Another thing is that when it comes to the management aspect, I really hope that all of our practitioners can work with the different opinions with a sense of ease of mind, rather than other than creating various conflicts and quarrels, so that you won't leave Larangar with regret. You are here for the virtuous Dharma, rather than creating the vice. So we're here to creating positive and virtuous deeds rather than the vice deeds. So we should try our best to practice whatever is virtuous. Another thing I would like to address is that after the chanting of dedication of merit, I want all of the male practitioners to be gathered over here after the class. There are some offerings that's made, and all of the offerings will be distributed to everyone tonight after the chanting of dedication. So you should definitely make it to the shrine hall so that you can receive all of them. It's really important for you to attend in the shrine hall. That is after the dedication of merit, that's the gathering. You can start to get to the shrine hall during the time of dedication of merit. Another thing is that for the male practitioners over here, around 8 o'clock, we have this practice of Pamasambhava. There's a particular chant that the male practitioners are going to practice all together tomorrow. It's a wrathful Pamasambhava. The female practitioners, you should also engage in this practice, though I know that you're quite busy. But I think it's quite important for everyone to supplicate to the wrathful Pamasambhava, especially during this dark age. We have so many obstacles, and at this period of difficult time, Pamasambhava being the embodiment of the Buddhas of the 3 times, we should supplicate to him as much as possible, and then we should engage in this kinds of practice. Another aspect is that currently we are studying entering the way of the Great Vehicle. Other than the group of people who are qualified to receive the teaching, you are not supposed to share this teaching with the others. Of course, we're not trying to keep it in secret because it is flawed. It is not like that at all. It is rather, since this particular teaching is a wonderful medicine to as an antidote to our illness nowadays. However, because it is such a wonderful medicine, it should be applied with caution and should be spread with caution as well, just as there are the patent medicines nowadays that's passed down from generations to generations, and the ingredients are kept in secret. There are people who would come to me and tell me, well, you know what, I have this patent ingredients of making a really wonderful alcohol. Should I give you that ingredients list? And I told him, well, that's not necessary since I don't drink anyways. However, when it comes to the Dharma, we should also uphold such kind of attitude that since this teaching is so precious, we should keep it in secret. There are all kinds of different ways of keeping things in secret. And there are the various situations that we should keep those things or the particular things in secrets, such as the place of retreat, the time of retreat, and the practice that you engage in retreat, and so on. Those are supposed to be kept in retreat. Of course, you can share it with your Lama. When the Lama is very good at keeping secrets, that is, if the Lama is not very good at keeping secrets, then maybe you don't even have to share it with the Lama. Anyhow, Lama is really the important instruction, pith instruction. So today and tomorrow we have Uttaratantra Shastra. You're probably quite tired right now, and you might fall asleep, but try not to. The answer past profound and wonderful Dharma is difficult encountering billions of aeons. I now see it here, receive it, and uphold it. De tomba sa la vacha la so nem jirbe shind mangbo jor na kirwa jin de jin phagba yan la ya chi cher yang rup se chen nyangbo le tomba rover ji ji ne ji yewa le namba mangbo ro dang dan jer ba thabam chog la dangwa dang warma dang na dangwa yi phongbok sam na ma dag dang ma sha dang na ye dang da xintar zhen me de pan ma dang kamar gyewe sha dag dang yartse sala char pan ye dag dag na dang ra tar nyar ji chen zog dag ki chu chu xiong dang ma xiong wa le yang chun dot ba dang chula dang wen jikten dag na hui ni ne tu ba ro Bever do San Tang Durji May Bepa Na Chukchuk Chadang Russer Song Tagla Chirter Juntu Med Chadang Yachi Rigby Cirki Kimba Dang Sevi China Nyomo Tangir Dakti Wagner Tagla Namkan Tuba Med Kor Kinche Tongma Meter Rover Lamner Namba Ringa Maxan Wala Trizim Mevjin Rurna Tagla Deva Med Teir Dungur Tagta Memson Gyatsa la so rakti jin tugji chen le tamchu chuchir ter jever jipsi de raptam be hala an chepu mala yongtur dungor jipshir tokbi shir shirver dambal he mi wangshi chogla gam ngumbrn donme te sherap tang tevjang shirbe sonrup ta per jimjer la Donner Dungeran Dun Gokchi Shibr Shawam Tonshiro Nana Shisha Nakir Diana Panshat Dene Toshar Man of Timber Shawar Tar Dunger Jeton Tenguk Padon Tevjin Lama Shishar Pansha Raksha Rakpro Shajan Timber Sha Cherter Tsamba Nini Chua Mevjin the Lai on Tamcheter no Ambam Tombartar Devjin Toba Churk Le Cuba Me per Kamkan the Skardan Namlam Badme per Chura Tagnor Tombram Zada Cherter Santak Jari Kana Marion Dokum Jigba Te Laim Tonga Timton Te Yerla Gavar Ponchitar Devjin Devjin Chujir Kele Mavshut Jikten Kamkanda Garden Jim Tong Temtong Tayang Stakta Trama Kansir Shida Rungi Ramjan Molam Dang Larnam Kina gave him Te Cherter Samba Badmertan Ramshon Churka Devjano Podang Hamjir Tamdan Yapki Kakshak Dang Gerur Vatang Gerur Girur Padang Wimber Shotong Dutchum Dang Shanchib Niva Jivi Chong the Lamston Tani Tabar Karmic Miko Lamman Ger Cherter Nime Donva Tirchik Tsenya La Pasur Jeba Kumatana Zamba Cherki Shietan Zambi Yondan Cherki Shietan Zambi Yondan Kyontagla Nimar Togmendernam Pagba Nyete Vjen Cherter Nimar Togme Pa Rangu Chigna Chikchir Chua Yi Pamar Dipar Shepa Tang Jandan Mambar Shepa Tar Tevjen Devar Shekba Yi Nima Tana
Chugud Nima Tamchir Chugud Zerdershi Kio Pamalar number Toba made per Jig Chudang Zikir Kotak of Shanchib Shnyambum Karashar V Gumkin Yaman Drover na Ishi goes of Drorum Zada Gamshir Dersha Tagba Ichir non Tamchala Dersha Nima Zunian Hoda Mepa Chichir and Cherer Tagda Tamchil Lakiaba Churan Namka Kirta na Sandye Nima Dershai Relachir Gubaram Bava Chirter Gachir Gozer Tonda Nim Nishir and Jiktin Kundar Nor Shene Remkin Chogdan Varma Mambi Relam Bapa Devjend Rgarinima Simson Sola Remkin Bava Jank Namkim Ter Tro Nima La Milla Mishi Munkava Shishi Tonton Bakan Tomba Yangman Tonton Bayan Man Tigjib Dagner Natsum Doki Good Tsogji Sarva Tagnan Jola Shishi Tonton Tar Sandje Jondak Shakse Migdan Mardan Bayi Keornam Tongjang Tonmetso Jar Ton Tem Tongwa Lenum Nyonwa Dang Temik Kirdon Chipim Sornor Tavi Manbe Jibar Nam Sandje Nima Goki Lorna Mam Tongwa Yir Name Tong Gir
Now let's get into the Uttaratantra Shastra. Well, this is a really important text. So sometimes I contemplate to myself that usually I notice that there are practitioners whom engage in the study of this particular text after a long period of time. They would first study the teachings such as Bodhisattva Charyavatara, and then started to study Madhyamika, such as Madhyamika Vatara and 400 verses and so on. And then they would get into Uttaratantra Shastra and then entering the way of a great vehicle. And teachings such as pointing out the nature of the mind by Phuntsogpa Rinpoche, and then the liberation up on touching various tantric texts as such. This is the way how usually would engage in the various studies gradually. I think all of us here were quite meritorious that we've received the teachings like such. I remember that I first received the Lira Lampa's loan of Lira Lampa's entire text and writings, and then Phuntsogpa Rinpoche once came back from teachings through various regions in Tibet, and then he gave teachings on then the 5 treatises of Maitreya, and then later the illusory net. So that's how I received the teachings. I think the practitioners nowadays should study the teachings that really are the, for example, the representations of the first and the second and the third turning of the wheel. We have to understand how Uttaratantra Shastra and how the Buddha nature, as well as how the Buddha's activity is all pervasive and spontaneous. I think people nowadays have not studied them to depth. Therefore, they don't have the understandings in depth, and they can't really make great progress. People over here also should continue to study gradually, also try to study the kind of representation of each of the turning of the Dharma wheel. The practitioners over here, if you're using the provisions of the Sangha, for example, using the shrine hall and all the provisions that's provided over here, the infrastructures and so on, but not engaging in those studies, then what's the meaning of you staying here without engaging in study? You're simply just squandering the merit in such a way of using their provided writings. Once you can engage in studies and develop the understanding in depth, so that would be good. That would be worthwhile because you can benefit sentient beings with all of those knowledge. This teaching of Uttaratantra Shastra, we paused it for a little while because of the pandemic, but now we are coming to the end of this teaching. Sometimes I notice that because we have other classes, we only have 2 times a week, and it is not very much continuous. But I would call upon you to study diligently with this, and then you can propagate this teaching. I think nowadays the teachings are quite supreme. All the Dharma teachings that we receive nowadays, they are more supreme than the previous ones that we've studied. It seems that it's gradually getting more into the depth of the Dharma. And I really hope that all of you can read into the great reference books and so on, so that you can develop a deeper sense of understanding. Especially, I think lots of the teachings that we're studying nowadays, they have a very deep and interweaved logic beneath. Now let's look at this particular teaching. We're currently on the 4th chapter, that is the activity of the Buddha, on how the Buddha benefits the sentient beings. What's the activity that's carried out by the Buddha? Previously, we've already covered the 3 examples given in this chapter. The example of Indra, example of the celestial drum. Now we're getting into the 4th example, that is the example of a Brahma. The Brahma, in fact, the appearance of the Brahma also very much is reliant on the karmic connections or the various auspicious connections that you've made to him. Just as we would say in the worldly sense that if you've made auspicious connections to the others, then they would meet you despite of the thousands of miles in between, thousands of miles in distance. But if you don't have auspicious connections to them, then even if the other person is sitting right in front of you, you would not make a connection whatsoever. Therefore, the Brahmas also, we need to make a good connection to them, or the Brahma would only appear in front of the ones who've made auspicious connections. Today I'm not reading the verses anymore. I'm going to only explain. I think our chant leader is probably quite tired today from all the chanting. Therefore, he only chanted very fast at the chanting before class, but it didn't really save much of the time, only a few minutes. Anyhow, over here, Brahma is the Brahma over here refers to the Maha Brahma that resides on the first realm of first level of the form realm. He abides in his palace. However, spontaneously and effortlessly, he can manifest into various other Brahmas or various forms of Brahmas into the six desire realms. The 6 desire realms, such as then the Nyamanarati heaven or the Tushita heaven and so on, so that all the celestial beings could also perceive him. In fact, he did not move from his palace whatsoever, did not even move an inch from his own palace, but his manifestations were sent to the 6 desire realms. Similarly, the great Muni, the perfect Buddha, also is immovable in his supreme Dharmakaya, in the absolute Dharmakaya. However, he would manifest in various ways to the sentient beings who've made connections to him. And the Buddha can manifest in various ways to benefit the sentient beings, into the various forms and so on and so forth. This is how the Buddha would manifest in various ways to benefit sentient beings, and that is also taught in Avatamsaka Sutra, where it says that just like the great Brahma, the Mahabrahma king, who can be all pervasive over the great thousandfold world into the many worlds. In the Uttaratantra Shastra that we're studying over here, it says that the Brahma can manifest into the six heaven realms. However, in the Avatamsaka Sutra, it says that the body of the great Brahma can be all pervasive over the great 3,000-fold worlds. However, the body does not have any difference from the Mahabrahma at all. Similarly, the Buddha teaches in similar ways. Avatamsaka Sutra, in fact, includes many of those wonderful teachings similar to this, such as it is taught that there are beings whom would perceive the Buddha or the Buddha's teachings in the way that is the Four Noble Truths, or the teachings according to the various stages. And some of them would perceive the Buddha as the Buddha is just born, or the Buddha is giving the teachings, or the Buddha is currently engaging in austerity practices. And some of them would perceive the Buddha as holding the form of great magnificence. And some would perceive the Buddha's body as rather petite. Some would perceive the Buddha uphold the lifespan of tens of thousands of aeons, and some of them would perceive the Buddha has rather a very short span of lifetime. Avatamsaka Sutra also says that though the Buddha would appear and manifest to the sentient beings according to their different capacities, however, the true nature of the Buddha is just like the space. There is no change whatsoever to the nature of the Buddha. So the sentient beings, since they have various capacities and various dispositions, the Buddha would manifest accordingly, just as how the vessel, the shape of the vessel would be different. How the shapes of the vessel and the size of the vessel is different. However, they reflect the moon within such vessels. With the aspiration of the Buddha, in fact, spontaneously and effortlessly would manifest to appear in front of sentient beings. In a worldly sense, in fact, we don't do that at all. We have a sense of differentiation. We would perceive friends and foes and then treat them very differently. We would then show a sense of loving kindness to the ones who are close to us as friends, and then repel the ones who we consider as foes. However, the Buddha do not do that at all. the Buddha would manifest in front of all sentient beings without differentiation and would manifest without any effort or any thoughts. I think after studying this particular part, you would generate a great faith towards the Buddha and a great revere towards the Buddha as well. Lots of the sentient beings, they suffer greatly. However, upon seeing the form and image of the Buddha, after reading the treasure of the teachings of the Buddha, right away they would generate a great faith that their hair would stand up at the back of their neck. And there are beings who don't have great connection to the Buddha, then they would think that, oh, maybe there is a Buddha, sure, but they won't generate any particular faith, so to speak. And there are the ones whom, upon hearing the Buddha's name or reading the Buddha's teachings, not only they don't generate faith, they would generate great sense of aversion. So there are different beings whom created different conditions and connections to the Buddha. We can definitely relate ourselves to that situation as well. There are beings that we've made great connections to, and we've even helped them previously. However, the way that they repay our kindness is quite different. The way they only repay our kindness by vice. I kept on talking for quite a few hours. Over 4 hours. So it's very difficult for me to teach right now. Difficult for me to speak. And then the next verse says that the great Brahma resides in his immeasurable palace without any wavering. However, at that time he could then enter into the celestial realm, the heavens are in the desire realm, and the celestial beings in those 6 realms would perceive him and would be able to see that how the provisions and enjoyments are far superior in the form realm than that of the desire realm. Just as nowadays, whenever we perceive anything that is really superior, we would feel a sense of longing. The various enjoyments, including the form, sound, and fragrance, and taste, and touch, all of those objects of enjoyments, in fact, are all far superior in the form realm than that of the desire realm. So that the celestial beings in the heavens of the desire realms, they would start abandon their longings and graspings in the sensuous enjoyments in their celestial realms and long for the Brahma's enjoyments in the form realms. Similarly, the Tathagata, the Sugata, in fact, also would manifest out of the immovable Dharmakaya. His manifestations would be of various forms. For example, he would manifest in a magnificent way to the bodhisattvas, and the way he would manifest in front of the mundane, the ordinary sentient beings are different. But sentient beings, upon seeing the manifestation of the Buddha, we would also generate the sense of longing to attain the similar attainment. In Chinese, we say that whenever we see someone who's meritorious, we also would contemplate and then long for such kind of meritorious fruition. Whenever we see other people harbor certain meritorious qualities, we also long for such qualities. Rather, I think nowadays in this dark age, people would have a very different longing, because they would feel that instead of longing to gain similar meritorious qualities, they would generate a great sense of jealousy, they would generate hatred, and so on, such kind of aggression. And there are people who even want to destroy the ones who seem to be superior than them. This is the kind of deluded mind in the modern world. Sometimes it's difficult to imagine, difficult to fathom. People are so fettered by the various desires in this world, such as cars and houses and so on. And then upon seeing the others having superior housing and superior vehicles, they would feel jealous and they would feel aggression. According to the Mahayana Uttaratantra Shastra, it says that the sentient beings, upon seeing the superior radiant body of the Buddha or the great sages whom attained certain fruition and who can exuberant great light of their enlightenment, the sentient beings also would generate a sense of longing to attain similar status of enlightenment. So over here, it says that the great Brahma, after appearing with his various manifestations into the desire realms, then the celestial beings would generate that sense of longing and aspiration to attain similar fruition. So the Buddha also, though unwavering in the Dharmakaya state, but his manifestation could inspire the sentient beings to also attain the similar fruition. Another aspect of the example expounded by Maitreya Bodhisattva is also quite superior. I think whenever it comes to our turn to study or to give examples in our essays, we should also learn from Maitreya Bodhisattva. Look at how excellent his examples are. The other aspect of this example is that the Brahma, or the perception of the Brahma's manifestations, can only be perceived by the kind of celestial beings whom accumulated virtuous deeds. In this way, the Brahmas can be perceived by those celestial beings. And then the Buddha, who is self-sprung and initially perfected his Nirmanakaya, his manifestations are like such as well. Because the Buddha had already made great aspirations during the causal stage, and because of his previous virtuous deeds conducted in the causal stage, the sentient beings would be able to perceive the Buddha's manifestation that is not with the deliberate effort. Also, the sentient beings have to accumulate great merit in their previous lives as well, just as how when it comes to the meeting of the virtuous spiritual teachers. May seem that the meeting with the Lama is very coincidental. However, it is rather everything is very spontaneously manifested, but you have to have the connections with them to start with. When it comes to the time to receive a wonderful teaching, we have to generate, we have to have already made virtuous connections with such teachings. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the great manifestations, I'm sure we have all met their manifestations. From the worldly sense, I believe there are people who also met great teachers, the worldly teachers. But such kind of encounters with the virtuous spiritual teachers or the worldly teachers, in fact, are all based on your karmic connections. I think these karmic connections are quite wondrous and subtle. It is very much based on your virtuous roots. There are great masters whom lived for a long period of time in this world, but maybe because of the aspiration, maybe because of the connections of the sentient beings, are rather quite weak. Therefore, some of the virtuous spiritual teachers do not have great activities. Not sure what the karmic connections it is. Their activity somehow is not very prosperous. And then the next one is from the aspect of how sentient beings whom have not made connections, then they would not be able to perceive the Buddha. I didn't really talk about the Brahma. Rather, over here it just talks about the Buddha. The Buddha's attainment of enlightenment and the 12 deeds or the 8 deeds. First of all, it is that the Buddha, Shakyamuni, first moved away from the Tushita heaven and then entered into his mother Mahamaya's womb. He was born in Lumbini and then went to his father's palace and then studied all kinds of knowledge and science and skills with the other students. And then he also enjoyed all kinds of entertainments with his spouse and her retinues. There are the numbers of 60,000 and 80,000. There are different records of such. And then seeking solitude and renounced the householder's life and the worldly bustles and became a monk. Also, for 6 years, he practiced austere asceticism. Then he went to Bodh Gaya. That's the 8th one. Then he attained enlightenment and defeated all the Maras. He turned the wheel of the Dharma, showing the path to liberation, to nirvana. I believe out of the 12 deeds, we didn't really count the nirvana aspect into the 12. So over here it says that it's shown all of those 12 deeds and then passed into nirvana. The 11 deeds and then passed into nirvana. So in total there are 12.
这个无缘分者面前的话，那就是佛陀是不行的。
But such kind of manifestation only appears to the kind of beings who made karmic connections. But to the kind of beings who have not made karmic connections, then that would not appear.
啊，就是什么佛是佛这个在世的时候呢，就是我沉沦；佛灭度后呢，我出生，就以前也是这样讲的。我们很多没有缘分的人呢，
When the Buddha was still abiding in this world, I was not
没有见到佛陀，就是
in this world. And when the Buddha passed into Nirvana, I am born in the world, and I had not made the auspicious karma to meet him in person. It is said in some verses.
就色为城，就是色为城的话呢，佛陀就是待的时间是最长的，21年、25年了。
The Buddha stayed in the city of Sarasvati for 25 years. Out of all the cities that he stayed, it was the longest period of time he spent at any place. In the city, there were. It is said that there were 9 billion households. But according to the translations, in Tibetan language, it is the 900 million, because the particular term of 100 million is a bit different. But out of those large number of people, there are still many people. There are still a large number of them have not even heard the name of the Buddha or even seen the Buddha. The 9 billion people is very difficult to imagine. About 2,000 years ago, I believe 9 billion is an incorrect number, because 9 billion is difficult to fathom. That's about 2,000 years ago. We can use our logic, and with our inference, we would be able to know. It's probably just a translation term that is used. When we look at the map nowadays, we will be able to see all the different kingdoms that the Buddha traveled to around the time. In fact, they're not very large. So around the Buddha's time, lots of the sentient beings, though lived during that period of time, but they've never even heard the name of the Buddha. Just like during the time of Phuntsog Rinpoche, many people had never heard of Phuntsog Rinpoche's name either. There are the great masters who are quite renowned, and their names are not heard by many sentient beings. And don't even mention about the kind of masters whom are not very well known, not very famous. So that's very easy to understand. That's the fourth example on the Brahma. The fifth example, if we can finish the fifth example, we can take a break. If we can't finish, and if you want to fall asleep, then well, there's really nothing else you can do. The next example is on the example of the orb of the sun. The sun, the cloud. So let's look at the sun. In terms of the sun, the first aspect talks about how the sun does not make any differentiations in terms of bestowing harm or benefit. When the sun is glowing, the lotus naturally would blossom. However, the kumata flower would then close their petals. Does the sun has any differentiations of intention of trying to open the lotus and trying to close the kumata flower? No, it doesn't. When we describe the lotus in terms of the treatise on language, we describe lotus as the one who is close to the one who is very close to the sun, or the one who can open with the touch of the sun. But the sun itself does not have any differentiation in the intention of trying to open the lotus and close the kumata flowers. The sun doesn't say that while the lotus is beautiful, I wanted to open, but the kumata flower is not beautiful, therefore I want to close the petals. The sun doesn't have this kind of intention at all. According to the scientists nowadays, the way they would describe it is that this is just the nature of the different flowers. That's what they would naturally do. The lotus flower would naturally blossom when the sun is glowing, when the sun rises. The 6 bhikshus who formed the group to create disorder in the Sangha, as well as the disciples such as Devadatta and so on. In fact, the Buddha benefits all of them just like the sun. He benefits everyone without differentiation. This is quite important. There are people who would think that, well, there are the ones who would make various statues, and the ones who probably out of their connections destroy the statues of the Buddha. But does the Buddha would bestow them punishment or words? No, the Buddha does not do so at all. The fact that they would receive various kinds of karmic retribution is because of the natural law. It is not because of the Buddha's personal preference of building statue or destroying the statues. Similarly, the Buddha creates so-called beneficial activities or not so beneficial activities does not influence the Buddha's beneficial activities or not. There are sentient beings whom grasp onto the sense of love and hate or preference very dearly. They would hold on to a sense of good and bad and beneficial or harmful very closely to themselves, and that is not like the Buddha at all. There were 5,000 people 5,000 bhikshus whom left the teaching of the Lotus Sutra assembly. The Buddha then stated, that's very good that they've left. Some Dharma teachers would say that, well, why did you come on the first day and then leave halfway through? Are you trying to test me? Are you trying to test my patience? There are lots of the Dharma teachers. They would get very aggressive when they see the audience leaves. But the Buddha does not. The Buddha is not like that at all. The Buddha is quite magnificent and well composed. The Buddha benefits them without any differentiation. The next aspect talks about benefiting the others and exuberating light to benefit others, also spontaneously manifests to benefit the others. Wouldn't that be wonderful if we can benefit the others like that? Sometimes we have the so-called beneficial activities to the others, and if it's not successful, we would get afflicted by such activities. Over here it says that just like the orb of the sun, that in fact do not have any intention to exuberating the immeasurable light, but it could open up the flowers such as lotus. During summer we would see hills and hills of wild flowers. It looks really beautiful, especially on the plateau of Tibet. It's really the most beautiful season of the year. Not only the sun encourages the blossom of lotus, in fact it also encourages the maturation of crops. There are songs to praise the shining of the sun. I'm not going to sing it now, but I'm pretty sure many of you know this song. Anyhow, at that time, just like how the sun would shine the immeasurable light and shed the immeasurable light, the great perfect orb of the Buddha also would exuberate immeasurable light. It's quite important for you to understand what we're talking about right now. You have to be able to find the key words and understand the key meanings. Similarly, just like the sun, the Buddha would also exuberate great light of the three teachings, the three yanas, so that the sentient beings, the lotus flower and the petals of the qualities would blossom. Just like it is stated in the ornament of clarity, it says that the sentient beings would slowly and slowly, the sentient beings' mind stream would be matured. It is not that they would It is not that they would right away come to a full maturation. In fact, it takes time, and gradually the sentient beings would be able to mature. During the daytime, when the sun is shining, people tend to feel extremely happy. Majority of the sentient beings and majority of the plants, in fact, they enjoy the sunlight, but there are a small number of sentient beings or plants they would rather not feel happy, such as the vultures. They do not the vultures, the owls, they would not like the sunlight. They would fall asleep during that time. But during the night time, when the sun goes down, the owls would be more happy. They would make the sound. I remember that when I was herding, the owls, in fact, particularly prefer a certain type of woods. And whenever we use the flashlight and we would sometimes see the reflection from the eyes of the owls. But whenever there are the light shining on to their eyes, they would not be able to fly. Once the flashlight is no longer shining on them, they would be able to fly again. The example given to the owls according to the treatise of language, we usually describe the owls as the ones whom have two faces or would change very quickly. Just like nowadays that there are people who have two faces as well. They would say one thing in front of you and do the other. They're just like the owls. So to the owls, they dislike the sunlight. Just like the owls, there are sentient beings who do not take delight in sunlight. So similarly, there are beings whom take delight in the Dharma and the beings whom do not take delight in the Dharma. However, just like the sunlight that does not have any differentiation from the intention of shining, the Dharma does not have any intention of benefiting certain beings and not benefiting certain beings. The sun and moon does not have any different intentions. It shines in the space without movement, just like the Buddha benefiting sentient beings with the great light of the Dharma without even without any movement. The next verse talks about how the orb of the sun would shine in the space. And dispel darkness of this world. Similarly, the Buddha's Dharmakaya and the Formkaya, in fact, all of them could, all of such kind of Dharmakaya and Formkaya, they are not on any of the sides of elaboration, but they would shine forth from the space of the Bodhi, from the full enlightenment, just like the sun. Such kind of Bodhi could dispel the darkness of the sentient beings and dispel the darkness of sentient beings through the light rays of wisdom. Through the blessings of the Buddha, and the light shone forth from the wisdom of the Buddha. After receiving such kind of wisdom, we ourselves should try to embody that and then shine forth such light rays of the Buddha to the other sentient beings. Just look at us. We've already studied such wonderful teachings. Every time when I circle around during the after-class presentation sessions and listening to the various students presenting the teachings to each other, I feel this deeply. I feel that it's quite important to give the teachings to the others as much as we can. When it comes to our turn to give the teachings to the others on, for example, Bodhisattva Charivatara and so on, you should try your best to give such teachings. You may have such connections to give teachings to a large number of students, or sometimes you may not. Sometimes you may feel that, well, I don't have enough students, or the students would leave the class after a little while. And then the Dharma teacher would get discouraged, and they would feel that, no, I don't want to give teachings anymore. I'm fine over here. I can practice well over here. I think the opportunities of giving teachings, in fact, very much is related to the causes and conditions. It has a lot to do with your aspirations and the power of such. On one hand, it's based on your wisdom. On the other, it is based on your skillful means. And then it also depends on your aspiration and causes and conditions. There are people who want to make such aspiration, especially during the time of studying Mahayana teachings. They really couldn't hold their great compassion anymore. They really want to benefit sentient beings. The next talks about simultaneously and simultaneously benefiting sentient beings, simultaneously appear to benefit sentient beings. The reflection of the sun can be reflected into various vessels, just like the moon's reflections can be reflected. In fact, similar to the moon's reflection, the sun can also reflect in various vessels. You can see the reflection of the sun in ocean, in the different vessels, different containers. The sentient beings, in the sentient beings are just like the vessels. In fact, we can also reflect the reflection of the sun that is perfect. According to Avatamsaka Sutra, it says that the vessel of the mind is of great purity. And if such vessel is pure, then you would be able to perceive the Buddha at all times. If the mind vessel is rather defiled and contaminated or broken, then you won't be able to perceive the Buddha. There are people who would think that, I'd rather not to supplicate to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas today, because if I were to supplicate to them, then they have to deal with my problems and it would be very tiresome for them. In fact, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are not manifesting out of deliberate effort. In fact, they are completely spontaneous and effortless. If you were to supplicate, and if your mind vessel is pure and capable, and at the time of supplication, you will definitely be able to receive the blessings from, for example, Padmasambhava and Chenrezig or your lamas. On the other hand, if your mind vessel is deluded and having all kinds of wrong views towards the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and do not supplicate, then of course you won't be able to receive the blessings. If you were to perceive the Lama with great defiled ideas at all times and only seeing the faults of the Lamas, then you would not be able to receive the perfect teachings from the Lama.
有时候我很想清净心，但是因为自己的烦恼啊，有时候业障出现的时候呢，可能就是心不清净啊，就是突然就是出现就是诸葛，就有可能的。但不管怎么样呢，就是慢慢的要这个。
Of course, as ordinary beings, it is inevitable that we would generate certain contaminated afflictions, but we should try to recognize that and understand that it is really out of temporary defilements that we perceive things in an inaccurate way, and then slowly your mind would get more purified. And then two more. In fact, a few more. Okay, so I'll be more brief. Some people are probably thinking that I am explaining it in a too explicit. The way of my explanation is too explicit, and we really want to go to sleep. The ones who are listening through radios, many of you are probably already fall asleep. You're probably writing your memoir of a dream. Now let's look at the brief and explicit explanations. Now the brief explanation says how how the sun would benefit in a gradual way, or the manifestation appears in a gradual way. This is such a wonderful example, just as how the sun once arises gradually, the sun of the Buddha, the perfect orb, also would manifest gradually. Just how the sunlight would gradually fall onto different heights of the phenomenal world, such as mountains. And when we look at the Mount Everest and then the Mount Kailash, the various mountains, the large and the small.
泰山、荒山、五台山，等等，就是有各种不同的山啦，就是，但这个呢
various mountains in China, such as Taishan Mountain and Mount Wutai and so on.
这个日光呢，就是照耀在这些山的话呢，那其实
Once the
山高的
light
就是在前，就是山低的呢，就是在后，就是这是一种缘起规律啊。
lands
也是这样
on
那么
the
这是乐祖
once the
现在
sun
的这个
arose,
那么
and
具有
then
这个
slowly
前
the
光的
light
这个
would first
日轮呢，就是
shine
升起来
on
的
the
四大
highest mountain,
这
then
意思就
slowly
是
slowly
光
onto
芒
the
呢，这
medium
个
and
太
then
阳
onto
呢，
the
就是在
lowest
虚
one.
空当中这个
Similarly,
显现，然后呢，
when
就是这个太阳就是这
the
个阳光
great
呢，就是
orb
普照于整个四大界
of
也好，四大
the
洲也好。
wisdom of
那么
the
这个时
Buddha,
候
in
呢，
fact,
就是
appears,
次第的，
it
它并不是
also
一次性的。
gradually would
如果是
manifest,
平地的话
it
呢，可
would
能一次性的
gradually
照耀。
manifest and
那它
shine
是
on
次第
the
的，
sentient
次第的
beings,
什
on
么
the
样呢？就
disciples.
是有高的
How?
山，有中等的山，有低的
Just
山啊。
like how
啊，
the
就是
sun
因为
would
高的
fall
山的话呢，就是
onto
先
the highest
然后
mountain
中等
first
的
and the
山，然后就
medium
是
and
低
then
的
the
山。
lowest.
那同样的道理，就是佛陀的这种日轮
Similarly,
的这个
the
光芒啊，
light of the
加持的
Buddha
他的智慧的话呢，也是次第的，就是显现
would
在
gradually
不
fall
同缘分的
onto
众生，
the
缘分
sentient
特别好的
beings
众
who
生的
made
现象，
different
然后
connections
就
to
是
the Buddha,
中等，然后呢
at
就是
first
再去这个后面的。
illuminating the sentient
我们
beings
也
made
应该知道，就是像这个
supreme
佛陀
connection
当
and
年
then
的
the
话呢，就是
medium
佛
and
陀
then
的
the
智慧是
lowest.
刚才前面讲的一样，
Just
没有
as
什么
stated
啊
that
对
the
我好的
Buddha's
所以
wisdom
呢，这个
is
提婆达多和
impartial.
罗睺罗的话
He
呢，就
does
是
not
也
make
是
any
完全是平等
differentiations
看待
based
的。
on,
就这样的话
oh,
呢，
the
佛陀肯
Buddha
定没有
wants to
啊，就是
make
这个为
benefit
什么在
to
这个
certain
好，我一
beings
定要
but
给他
not
分
the
为
other.
什么法。
It
然
is
后
not
这
to
个提
say
婆达
that the
多的话
Buddha
呢，就
said
是这个坏蛋就是我不照理，不给他这样。
Manjushri
没有这样。
Bodhisattva
那佛
is
陀当时所传的这些
very
法
good
的
to
话
me,
呢，
therefore I'm
永远
going
是
to
一些特别
make,
好的
I'm
弟
going
子
to
的话
give
呢，就是
teachings
先
and benefit
接
him the
受，
most. But
然后有一部分
Devadatta,
呢就
he's
是中间接
terrible
受，
to me,
有
therefore
一
I'm
部
not
分
going
呢
to
就是
benefit
当时
him.
的根
It
本
is
没有
not
没
like
有
that at
去
all.
接受，甚至
In
呢
fact,
就是
there
没
are
有被
beings
会
whom
堕落。所以这
made
个是
various
从佛教当中
various
来讲呢，就
connections
是
to
确
the
实是
Buddha.
很
They
重要的。
receive
所以我们
various
实践当中
fruitions
也是可以说的，
because
这
of
个
their
从
own
实践的当
capacities
时
and
这
not
个
because
跟
of
随
the
和
Dharma
尊者也好，还有
teachings
这个
given
这
from
个
the
老子
Buddha
也
or
好，
the
就是他们的
blessings
这个弟子当中的话
given
呢，也有这
from
种
the
道
Buddha.
理啊，就是不一定是那个老师
The
呢，就是
disciples
一
from
定
the
要把
worldly
最深
sense,
的
the
这个
students
秘密的
all
给
have
他。
different
当然，佛教
capacities.
当中也
The
有这样的，
disciples
但是
of
这个呢，就是
Confucius
老师
or
呢，
Lao
已经
Tzu,
发
they
现
all
这个他
have
是
different
这个法
capacities
器
as well.
所以我也在想，就是我们这个
And
上师
because
领导
of
也
the
好，很
vessels
多
are
这
very
个传
different,
承上师的
therefore
话呢，
the
其实当
way
年的话
that
呢，就是大
the
家都是一
disciples
起来这
receive
个体会，一
blessings and
起来
teachings
学
are
的，
different.
年龄也是同
Sometimes
样
I
的，然后
contemplate
生活条件也是同样
how
的，时间也是同样
Ponzo
的，
Rinpoche's
环境也是在
disciples
一个
also
地方。
manifest in
那
this
所
way
听的法呢，就是
are all
一
the
样
same
的，
as
啊，
well.
完
In
完
fact,
全
we
是
all
这个。
listen to the
方
teaching
如法
from
而且
Ponzo
没有什么
Rinpoche
个别的
at
这
the
个
same
个
time
别
for
的
the
这
same
个弟子呀，
duration
单
and
独
listen
的
to the
这样
same
的，就是
teachings.
应该是
It is not
就
that
除了
Ponzo
极少
Rinpoche
数
give
以外，就
different
就没
teachings
有
to
没有
different
这么
people. It is not
但
like
是
that
呢，
at all.
就最后就是得
Other
到的
than
这
maybe
个
just
观
very
念就是把
few
自己心里
unusual
头的
cases.
话呢，
But
也
other
是
than
这
that,
个
majority
这
of
个
us
这个
receive
是
the
不
same
改变
teachings
的，
for
就
the
是
same
一般
period
般
of
的，有些
time.
的可能马上就
But
不自
the
觉，甚
way
至有些
that
的话呢，不自
different
最后
people
因为自己的各种性格的
are
话呢，
at
就
the
是
present
就
time
就是金刚地狱在前面等等
are
的，
quite
有这样的
different.
这
There
个
are
经
the
验。
ones
所
who
以说呢，就
are
这个
great
比喻是应该很
practitioners
好。
now,
当时
and
可
there
能
are
很
the
多人觉
ones
得
whom are
啊，是不是
probably
很有偏见啊？上师对某个人就是很好的
are
啊，就是对
reborn born in lower realms. The teachers do not differentiate the disciples. The teachers would give the teachings in great equanimity. However, the way that disciples receive them is different. I've emphasized on this a few times that in fact the Dharma teachings are impartial. However, the way the students receive it is very different. I've said that the Dharma does not have a master. In fact, there is no owner of the Dharma. You can have as much Dharma as you want depending on your capacity and your diligence. From the teaching of Uttaratantra Shastra, we can use our inference and understand the teachings of the great masters. Look at all of you here. You're listening to the same teachings, and the teaching is given to you impartially. However, the way you received it, the way that you're able to take it into your heart and minds and onto the path is different, and that can only be told based on the time. There are people whom, after a period of time, would be able to progress along the path, and the ones whom would not only not being benefited from the Dharma, rather they would be harmed by the path. Two more verses over here. It says that since the Buddha's, in fact, the Buddha's activity of benefiting sentient beings, in fact, is far superior than that of the sun. How so? There are two. The first one is through the extensiveness of the luminosity, and second one is through the function. First of all, the sun can only dispel the darkness within certain radius, and the second is that the sun can only dispel the darkness on the phenomenal world, but not of the darkness of the sentient beings' minds. But the Buddha, in fact, he would be able to exuberate the various colored light to immeasurable space and boundless places. This is the kind of power that is particular to the Buddha, but not to the sun. Just like the X-rays that we have nowadays, the Buddha's light can directly enter into our mind. According to the Abhinishta Kramana Sutra, it says that the luminosity from the sun can light only the day but not the night. Right now the sun, for example, is in the west but not over here, so we can only see that the sun can lit certain part of the world, but not all. However, the Buddha's light can dispel the sentient beings' darkness at all times, and the sun's light can only dispel the darkness in the phenomenal world, but not to the sentient beings. However, the Buddha's light can. The sun's light cannot dispel the suffering, the darkness, and ignorance of the sentient beings. However, that can be done through the light of the Buddhas. When the Buddha traveled to various villages and kingdoms, there are beings whom can perceive such kind of light exuberated from the great sage. Even the blinded ones, even the ones who are deaf, even the ones who are insane, the ones who are poor, from the blessings of the Buddha, of the Buddha's light, they attain whatever they wished for. I believe there was a story.
那等等，就是所以这个佛陀呢，就是还有这个实践当中的三恶趣当很多。
There's a story, probably according to the 100 stories of the karma, where an ugly woman whom upon seeing the Buddha attained whatever she wanted to as well. So the sentient beings, out of the various ignorance and afflictions they fall into,
其实依靠这个佛陀的这种智慧的光芒的这个
or they have various kinds of afflictions and sufferings, such as the ones who are blind and deaf and so on. But with the blessings of the light of the Buddha, they would be able to gain the light of wisdom and generate insight of the truth of this world. Unfortunately, we're just briefly studying this, but this is really important. Living in this world, being exposed to the light of the Buddha's teaching, in fact, we can consider ourselves as the most fortunate ones. Through the teachings of the Buddha and the light of the Buddha, I believe that the future of the human beings can be of great brightness still. We have a teaching tomorrow on Uttaratantra Shastra still tomorrow.